Welcome to the Iron 31 podcast, where we crave God's word to help us restore to our original design and confidently navigate through our womanhood. In this little corner of the internet, we will touch on nearly every aspect we face as women and learn how to charge the front lines with God's truth. We want you to take a seat with us as we hope to bring light to your life through our powerful, encouraging, and convicting conversations. Welcome, sister. We are so grateful you are here. Welcome back to the Iron 31 podcast, everyone. This is actually the last episode for season 1 before we get into season 2, which I'm really excited for. And today, for our last episode, we're celebrating a great season 1 with the person behind it all, my husband, Dan. Babe, honey buns.
It's actually
whatever.
been me who's written everything.
Oh, yeah.
Done all the devotionals.
Tell us more.
And all the calls.
How does that go? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said I was the one behind it all.
Okay. A man behind the camera.
Yeah. Your entire film crew.
Well, can't forget Gino and Archie and Murph. So give them credit too.
Blooper reel coming soon for that.
Yes. Oh, all the bloopers with Gino just sprawling out. But we're here today to talk to you guys about something that we have learned come up in not just our marriage, but our relationship. And I mentioned to Dan on Friday of the topic that I wanted to cover. And he's like, can we really talk about that? We don't really, have a lot of arguments. And I think that's why we can talk about this, is because we are really good at finding insecurities in our conflict, which is what we're talking about today, of how you can expose your insecurities in your conflict, how to recognize whether you're operating or talking out of an insecurity rather than trying to find a solution at hand within your conflict. And I have found these strategies very helpful, not just in marriage, but just really in any relationship, whether that's the workspace, friendships, family members, and it's just really helped me navigate really hard conversations, but then also see, am I searching for a solution or am I defending an insecurity that maybe I didn't really know about? So we're going to talk to you guys about that today and just kind of get the man's perspective and the woman's perspective in it, because I think those are both really, really important to note. So Dan, can you tell me first, what is a man's view of conflict when it comes up in a relationship? You can feel the heat coming, you feel the tension rising, what's going through a man's head?
So every guy's obviously different. Some guys are going to want to avoid the conflict by retreating. Some guys are going to avoid the conflict by bulldozing through it. You have to take into account the history of the relationship too, right? Does a guy routinely not feel heard? And I'm sure women are the same way, right? Do you feel like you don't get heard? Do you feel like you've been a doormat, or that you've had to be right, because the longer the argument goes on, the worse things get? It's hard to lock down to just exactly how a guy's going to be in an argument.
Yeah. Do you feel like it has to do a lot with their past upbringing, past relationships? Is all that kind of tied into place? Yeah.
How much were boundaries respected in an argument in their past, right?
Yeah. Okay. I would say from the female's perspective, from my own experience, it's always defending an insecurity that I did not even know was deep down. So one thing that I was thinking about, honestly, right before this podcast is just reflecting back on our entire relationship. And one thing that really came to mind that I remembered was when we first started dating, you didn't text. It was
no.
It was a very,
I still don't.
you don't.
Now you're married to me.
Yeah, and now I'm married to you. It was very evident that you did not want to talk to me through the phone. You were very just very intentional when we were with each other. But I think because this is a repetitive sequence of events in relationships now. We all have a smartphone. We all have access to a phone. And if you don't, it's are you even from this world? So I think this is a common conflict that does come up, whether that's in the dating world or maybe even the marriage world too, of what may seem like a lack of communication. But from a girl's perspective, I was thinking on this, why do a lot of girls struggle with if the significant other or the guy that they're talking to is kind of lacking in communication or not texting back, or they get fearful because the man isn't texting back? And it really, within me specifically, was almost that fear of abandonment of oh, he's not happy with me, or I did something wrong, or, oh, we found something he didn't like about me. So when the man texts back, in a relationship, it's, oh, they're still affirming me. Oh, they still want to be here. Oh, it's like almost affirming to me. But then I had to realize it. And as I was thinking through this, I was thinking, how many times do we bring up a conflict, but really the root of it is an insecurity rather than the conflict itself? So the conflict of, well, you're not texting me back, but you weren't communicating with me. It's actually that root of that fear of abandonment or fear of rejection that's actually happening. But I think some girls can also almost go against that and say, well, that's just how I feel loved. That's my love language of just like communicating. But what I want to get into today is, how do we know that we are operating out of really trying to find a resolution to a conflict, or maybe we're operating out of our love language or operating out of that insecurity? So my next question to you is, like, what have you found in your past as a man where you have found that you are operating out of an insecurity during conflict in really any relationship, whether that's with me, whether that's with a coworker? What have you found in your specific experience of you have found that the insecurity is talking rather than the solution that you're wanting to bring to the conversation?
I think one of my bigger pains is feeling like and I'm going to say taken for granted, but I don't mean it as personal. I mean it from one of my fears is that I'm going to somehow be attached to someone or fall under someone's authority who just takes other people for granted, right? Like, and I don't know if you've talked about this, I don't think you put it on the podcast before, but like I used to snap in the grocery stores, right? Because there's 20 zillion people lined up and there's one actual cash register open, and everyone's like, "Oh, the self-service is open." It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. Like, and it pisses me off because the grocery store knows you're still gonna stand there in line and pay for your crap. Like, what are you gonna put it all back and walk away and go do it again somewhere else? No, they know you're gonna pay for it. They know nothing is gonna change. And so I would have the same beef with bosses, right? Bosses would just come in and I don't know, they have this weirdo thing going on at home, and they would just piss everyone off today. It's like, dude, look, like we're not here for your emotional punching bag, like that would always just really piss me off. And so being taken for granted, I would say, is a big insecurity of mine, but like not so personal to me, just like this person's walking around all day just thinking that it's just okay to talk like this.
Yeah.
And then I think, obviously with dating, like the first 3 to 6 months, everything's fantastic, right? Because you guys always put your best foot forward. Always holding the door open, always.
You still do that.
I still do. Yeah.
You still open the car door for me.
Yeah, well, I got to keep the assets to being married to me high, so take what I can get. But you know what I mean? Like everyone, those first few months of the relationship, it's always going to be good, right? Even if it's not going to be a good one overall, or if it's a terrible couple, like they will still usually have a really good first 3 to 6 months, right? And if you notice, a lot of couples, they try to hang on to that even though they don't work anymore. But anyways, I'm sure it's another episode. But then after that 6 months in a relationship, I'll just speak for the guys here, that a lot of guys fear, especially if you're a guy and you're late 20s, early 30s, and you're still not married, you have had some kind of wounding relationship where the woman probably just kind of wore you down over time. Like it first started with the, hey, I need you to be texting me back, to, hey, why do you want to hang out with your friend instead of me? Hey, do that. It just, they have been in some kind of relationship that just wears them down over time. And so I think it's a very guy thing to fear that long-term wearing down over time.
Yeah.
And so I would say for me, a lot of that has been head on a swivel looking out for that, right? Which can be healthy to a degree, because I've learned my lessons, but also unhealthy to a degree. It's like, hey, look, it's okay to text back. It's not. She's not demanding your time. She's not demanding your entire communication. But
right.
So I would say that's probably the bigger thing that's hung up is like, hey, what is our time together versus your time together with me when we were first dating, right? Or how much, even just, again, I know it sounds like it's very personal. To me, it's not as personal. It's just like hey, do you enjoy being in this relationship with me, or do you just enjoy being in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like
right.
how I think it aggravates a lot of guys, and I know I'm going way off on a tangent here, but it gets aggravating when, a guy has a girlfriend who, and maybe he deserves it, whatever, but gets chewed out, and then the girlfriend goes and hangs out with other people, and it's just the best day ever. It's like when the guy's sitting there like, wait, why am I getting the worst attitudes, and these people who aren't committed to you are getting your best attitudes, And so again, that feeling like we're going to be worn down over time, and protecting against that is probably my And some other guys' bigger worry when it comes to a fight as, are we fighting over this, or is this you trying to take new territory with me?
Yeah. No, I can absolutely attest to that because I can see the woman's perspective in that. Not when I say perspective, I mean the perspective of maybe what she's walked through. So like men, for example, as you're saying, are fearful of being worn down because the woman is in their ear constantly, almost like why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Can you please do this? I thought we already talked about this and you're still not doing it. And
I'm just waiting for our relationship to move forward. I just feel like, gosh, man, that's the worst one right there.
Ladies, if you're listening to this,
I just feel like we should be moving forward. Well, here's a pro tip. If the guy's not moving forward, I'm not saying it's you, but it's definitely something in him that is bumping up against something that's in you. Just gonna say that. Sorry, I completely interrupted you.
No, I can, like, it's just so interesting hearing the man's perspective because as you're talking, I'm literally thinking of the woman's perspective of just wounds that I've walked through and seeing how women really do. I think you said the fear of being worn down. Women definitely fear that rejection because we are constantly wanting to be pursued, but we're wanting to be pursued specifically for who we are. So when a relationship does not work out, we almost attack our uniqueness in our own way of, oh, well, this wasn't accepted, so maybe I need to change this before I walk into a new relationship, or, oh, he didn't like this, so now that is what's wrong with that woman, instead of just seeing it as, hey, this isn't working. And it's that fear of rejection that kind of fuels those conflicts constantly of, you're not texting back. Do you even want to talk to me? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? And in a woman's head, I mean, you're thinking back through every single conversation, every single date that you had. Like, did I do something wrong? Did I say something to upset him? Like, it's that fear of rejection of almost like not doing enough for the other person. And I think we can get that in other relationships too, whether that's marriage or in a co-working space. Like you had even said, the same fear of like being taken advantage of or being worn down was in correlation to your intimate relationship, but also in your working space as well. I think women can very much relate to that of feeling rejected, not only from an intimate relationship, but also in a working space. Like if they're looking for that promotion, if they are looking to make friends in the working space, it's that constant battle of, am I accepted? And like we've talked about in another episode of, am I noticed? Like every woman still wants to be noticed, whether it's from their significant other or just in general, they're constantly trying to fill that void. So when conflict happens, a lot of times it's arising because of that insecurity of feeling rejected.
Yeah, I would say it's a fear of rejection versus a fear of defeat.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of the two forces that are clashing.
Yeah, right. So, and because in the end, it's good if a relationship doesn't work out and it's not supposed to, but in that moment, it's just dealing with that rejection. It's the fear of it happening. Yeah. And I've even noticed,
and then from a guy's perspective, it's, well, which one of us was wrong?
Right.
That's the bigger part is like, well, what if we break up and she does better? Well, then I was the guy, I was the wrong one, I lost basically.
Right. And I think like we're talking a lot about the dating realm, but if you're married, know that this can be applicable to you too, because Dan and I being married, knowing our insecurities have helped us navigate through our conflicts so much. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, Dan was like, do we even fit to even talk about this? Like I feel like we haven't had enough arguments or disagreements to even be able to talk about this. But I think we have such a peaceful household because we've walked through this and because we easily recognize whether we're frustrated through an insecurity or we're frustrated at the situation. Because when you get into conflict, again, whether that's in a marriage disagreement, a dating disagreement, a co-working disagreement, a friend disagreement, there usually is some type of topical issue at hand of, this frustrated me specifically, so now I'm angry, and now we're going to have a conflict about it or a disagreement about it. But although there is a topical thing at hand, there usually is much, much more. And if you have not listened to our other podcast that we did together, The Heart of a Man, I go into this huge pizza dispute that Dan and I go to. So I'm not going to go into it.
Oh, you go into it, huh?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You
get to hear the real side of the story.
The real side of the story. That's in episode... Is it 8?
A couple episodes ago.
I think episode 8. So if you want to go back and listen to that story, it is well worth it. But this is just one of quite a few disagreements that we've had in our marriage.
The funny part is after that episode, we did one on forgiveness, which I thought was funny. I just realized that.
Yep.
Magically.
The
forgiveness episode came next.
Come right after that. Yes. Yep. But it is so interesting because that's not like our only disagreement that we've had in marriage. I think it was just, we were arguing about stinking pizza. That, like the topical conflict at hand was so silly.
Yeah.
But that's when it's so important to go deeper. And
it was the thing behind the thing.
Yes.
Is what we were fighting over.
Yes, exactly. And we didn't realize that at the time. At the time, what mattered most was, are you eating my pizza that I made for you and just poured my heart and soul into? Or are you going to order pizza, Dan? What are you going to do?
Ashley's pizza making has gotten phenomenally better, by the way. It is quite tasty.
We just had pizza with friends, and they were quite impressed. They were nervous at first because they've listened to episode 8. They were very nervous, and we did have a backup plan, but they were impressed.
Dominoes on speed dial, yeah.
Yep. But I think from that disagreement that we had, and we've had disagreements that actually matter since then of like adulting decisions, financial decisions. But what we have found is that these insecurities just keep coming up, and we're so quick to recognize when we are arguing through an insecurity or whether we are actually trying to find a solution with the conflict at hand. And I think here recently, you and I both have noticed that we're still struggling with that like scarcity mindset around just life in general or finances or whatever that may be. And I think you said it the other day, you were like, hey, I expect too little out of the day and you expect too much. Mm-hmm. And that's like my striving nature of, am I doing enough? And I feel like that's your nature of, am I measuring up?
Yeah.
And almost like retreating to keep that safe space in your heart. And maybe you disagree. You can kind of touch on that, but we often do get in disagreements based upon those insecurities mm-hmm. of, I have to make sure that I'm doing enough. I have to make sure that I'm being the most productive during the day. I want to cook you dinner. I want to get our business going. I want to make sure that we're provided for, but then I also want to do a slew of other things. But you're like, hold on, like it's literally 24 hours. And for 8 of those, you need to sleep.
Yeah.
So like we have definitely conflicted on that. But just from your perspective of our disagreements, where do you think it's most important to come up with at first, like, hey, is there something deeper here? Do you feel like you need to have the disagreement and the conflict over the topical situation first? Or do you think it's more important to kind of pause early on and say, hey, is there a deeper root here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not every argument has to be like a philosophical discussion.
Right. I don't,
yeah. I think, and maybe it's one of those, you touch base back at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome of the argument. And mm-hmm. I mean, there's definitely been times where we've had frustrations and then, I don't know, typical guy, like 30 minutes later, I'm like, man, I should have said, would have told her, you know what?
I would have said this and this, yeah. With shower thoughts afterwards. Like, I said this and this and this.
Yeah, so like sometimes we come back and we reflect, and I don't shout, obviously, chill out. But
he does not.
But it's like, oh, okay, like I should have just, because look, we're not going to communicate our feelings well. That's just us. Mm-hmm. But that ability to take time to compartmentalize and say, hey, look, okay, here's what I was actually frustrated about. I know I've gotten in trouble in arguments sometimes because I just automatically assumed you were feeling a certain way, so mm-hmm. I got mad about it. And that, of course, made everything much nicer and calmer. So that would be a big thing for me, is just give yourself, if someone reflects later and they're like, hey, I want to kind of, there's something else I didn't say, obviously have healthy boundaries, but to some degree, like, be okay with coming back later and talking about it,
Yeah.
I also think we have good boundaries in an argument where if one of us needs to just take 5, it's acceptable. Yeah. And it's not something where it's like, whoa, how dare you? It's like, hey, look, if someone says they need to take 5, it's because things are only going to get worse if they don't. So
I love how you said that, because it's like when you are married, you are one. Like you mm-hmm. are one unit. The Bible says so. But there is so much importance in respecting the other person's needs, because we still are 2 individuals coming together, and we learned how to have conflict different. We learned how to run a household differently. We learned how to navigate adulthood differently. And I think that still is so important to be respected, even though you are one. So the fact that you said having boundaries, like, that is not meant to be disrespectful to the other person, or that's not meant to like let's shy away from the conflict. It's meant to protect the hearts of both individuals. So I love that you just said that, of the importance of having boundaries in your conflict, knowing what the other person needs and being able to recognize that even in the heat of the moment of being frustrated.
Yeah.
I think that's something that you
Takes
and
practice.
Yeah. It absolutely does. We should just argue more, babe. Just to really get good at it and come back with an even better episode.
Yeah. I've heard that's called having kids.
Oh,
is what that's what I've heard.
Yep.
Is how that gets better.
We'll learn through that. We'll learn through that when the time is there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have just like 4 points that I really reflected on. So when I was reflecting on this podcast, I basically had like a general idea of what I wanted to talk about, but really just wanted the Holy Spirit to just fuel it. But I did come up with 4 typical signs of operating out of an insecurity in a relationship. But I realize that this may be very much so from a lady's perspective. So I would love your perspective on the man side of this. So 4 different signs that are very evident that you are operating or communicating through an insecurity, whether that be dating, marriage, co-working, friends, family, whatever that may be. So the first one is you get defensive. And I know that I've done this with you before, of just like almost having to defend my grounds or defend my actions, or defend like, well, I did it because of this, or I said this because this is what I was thinking. And I'm being very, very, very defensive. And I realize that is a fear of fault being exposed. And where I am in a conflict, I know you know me, like I struggle with that perfectionism mindset. And that is a very sinful mindset to have, because that's saying that we are capable of being perfect and we're not. But that's still something that I'm working through, of just not having to be perfect all the time. Yeah. And so,
well, also for you, that's the enemy taking advantage of something, of a strength of yours. That is, you very much want to honor whatever is God put in your life, whether it's your health, your marriage, your relationships, our stinking pets, like so I would say that's the enemy kind of taking something good in you and trying to twist it so that it becomes a weakness instead of a strength.
Oh, I absolutely agree. So I love that perspective. You pull things. It's so cool how you pull things out of me, or you pull things that I'm not seeing. And you just kind of pull that blind spot of how, hey, this is how the enemy is twisting this into a half-truth. He's actually turning a strength into a weakness. Mm-hmm. And I would absolutely agree, because if you're upset with me for, I can't even think of an example, but like,
that's right.
Just so calm. But I guess like a hypothetical example would be like if I've like worked all day or worked on the house and you're frustrated that something has been done a certain way, then I get defensive of like, well, that's because I was worried about everything else being perfect. Yeah. So, I couldn't do this because I was just so worried about, I get defensive. And that is, it's not the tangible issue at hand of like the dishwasher is loaded incorrectly. Not that that's something, that's just a hypothetical example, and I'm terrible at loading the dishwasher, so that's why I'm thinking it. This is actually something. Dan is very like methodical.
Here's what happens.
You are so methodical in how you load the dishwasher.
No, because so here's the thing. I used to make fun of relationships where one of them criticized how the other person loaded the dishwasher. I was like, why would you waste your air on that? And then I get married to Ashley here. So I only knew Ashley when she had other roommates. So I never knew where the line was drawn on who was doing what. And it's funny because it's not bad. Okay, look, it's a dishwasher, right? They get clean no matter what. It is what it is. Who cares? Like, there are people in countries that would kill to have a dishwasher. So it doesn't actually matter. But it's just funny to see you just certain habits and routines you have down to the minute, but when it comes to the dishwasher, you literally just throw the crap in there.
Absolutely, because it's not done. If there's a dish still in the sink, the task is not complete.
When we have kids and they throw all their stuff in the closet and claim they clean the room and you get mad, I'm just gonna lead everyone to the kitchen and be like, "Here's how Mom loaded the dishwasher." Notice the resemblance.
This is where it came from.
This is your side of the gene pool, babe. So it is fine, but I also know that I've also seen you get heated when the dishwasher didn't clean them to perfection.
Oh, absolutely. You are an appliance and I expect perfection out of you.
Which is natural, but I'm like, okay, well, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it is kind of you here. Like, this is, User error, as they call it.
Yes. So this is a good example because this has definitely been a topic in our household. As you guys can see.
It's not though. Like that's the funny part is that it's not.
And you are very patient. I'm going to call myself out for the world to hear. I'm very, very awful with the dishwasher because if there's 10 dishes in the sink.
But it doesn't matter. That's the funny part. Like no, like it doesn't.
But there's still a dish
that has
in the
not
sink.
depreciated the quality of our marriage at all.
I know,
and you're like, I'm so bad at it. It's like no one cares. Like it's fine. It's
yes, but it's like it's still something that I could find myself getting defensive over. It's like, well, why the dishwasher's loaded this way? It's because I've been just cooking dinner all night for my family of 2.
Yeah.
So it's like, but in all seriousness, like we can get defensive in our conflict of defending, well, it's this way because like we want to defend, but it's that fear of a fault being exposed. We're insecure in an area and we're afraid of it getting exposed. So we become defensive in our conflict. Would you agree that that's the same from a man's perspective?
Again, defensiveness for a guy is either going to be try to bulldoze through it or retreat from it, right?
Yeah.
Like get this over in whatever way I view as quick as possible.
Okay.
Is so I can go back to so I can put it in the box, right? We put everything in a box, compartmentalize, and we can go back to doing what we were doing. So getting defensive, yes, I would say in that way though.
Okay. So you're saying, ladies, listen, if a man just says, whatever, just do it, and kind of retreats, that is not an agreement. Or is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'm not going to say it's the wrong answer. It's just, it might not be the right method to get there.
Yes,
you know?
Yeah.
Because there are guys who are just too critical, and they're just like, hey, man, you need to chill out for a bit.
Okay, gotcha.
And so I'm not putting this on ladies' responsibilities, but like you guys have to realize, like we just suck with our emotions. Like we're just, we literally don't know how to process them most of the time. I should say we don't know how to process them in extreme situations.
Yeah.
And so we definitely don't know how to communicate them.
Right.
And so you can get to the right solution the totally wrong way. And it's like, well, do we address this or do we just let it be a victory, you know?
Right.
And it's so I feel bad for women in that regard, but like and this is not me bashing guys or anything, just to a degree, we're so good at compartmentalizing that we now apply it to our emotions.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to just realize like, wait, my guy probably has a quarter of the experience expressing himself that I do.
Right.
Like literally.
Right.
Even though you guys have been married, even though you guys have been through this and that or whatever. Thank you, Gina. This is great. It's great.
If you are not watching visibly, our cat has joined the party.
even if the guy is very good communicative with you, like there's still that uncharted wilderness called our emotions.
Yeah.
That's just difficult, you know? So fear of being exposed is a huge part because if we've been posing or if we get proven that we're not measured up, that's exposing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. I love how you said that. And again, that's a reference from episode 8, where Dan goes into how guys will pose because of the fear of being exposed that they're not measuring up in a certain area of life. They will pose as if they are. Because that gives them, it gives them that feeling of, oh, I am measuring up. So that, maybe that's the egotistical man or the man always hyping himself up.
You're filling the gap, right?
Right?
You're filling the gap between who you feel like you need to be and who you feel like you are.
Yeah.
Again, feel being the key word.
Yeah. So first one, if you often get defensive in your disagreements or your conflict, really take a step back and ask yourself, are you fearing of an insecurity being exposed or an area that you are ashamed of in your life or a quality that you want to possess, but maybe isn't there. You feel like it's not there. Are you afraid of something being exposed in the conflict? And then the second one I have is, as a woman, we typically create our own mountains in a conversation. So that's why something very small can get to something very large very, very quickly. Or the blow up happens. And what I have found in my past is when we create our own mountains, meaning that something small is now just grown 14,000 feet high. And I believe that it is the fear of abandonment. So we want to see the other person fight for us. And man, how often do we see this on our toxic thing that we do? Love is Blind.
Yep.
We watch it.
Our guilty pleasure.
This is us admitting it. We have a group of friends who also watch it. We just watched the finale.
Bonus episode about it coming sometime soon.
Oh,
I don't
sometime
know.
soon. It's, man, you just really watch and you just really reflect like, oh, I've seen myself do that before.
Yeah.
So, and we see this a lot on the show of just like big mountains being created because us as women, if we do fear abandonment, we want to see how hard the man is going to fight for us, or how hard the boss is going to fight for us to stay, or how hard the friend is going to work to keep that relationship. So we often will blow up a situation just to see the other person fight for the relationship. Would you agree that either
That women do that? Yes, absolutely.
I was going to say that.
Next episode.
Do you think that men do this, or is that just something that's typically a fear in women will do in a conflict and then men respond to it?
Well, I would say, I mean, there are some guys who are insecure and they play not to lose in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's they do just enough to keep you in the relationship, right?
Yeah.
That's why you have guys who are just super passive, do nothing all day, but the moment there's conflict, they're just the sweetest guy. They're all there. It's all like all this like just over. And I'm sure that would create that insecurity even more to a woman. It's like, geez, man, like which version of my husband am I gonna get today?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
But that's a guy playing not to lose, right? Oh, I have to do this to keep your okay, done. Okay, now that that's solved, now I can go back to just ignoring or being complacent or being disrespectful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you?
That would be what I say is in contrast to that.
Okay. How do men typically react to like, because I do see, even in observation, like I do see this oftentimes in women of, they will create their own mountain to get the other person to fight for them, even if they realize they're doing it or not. So how would you say men typically respond to this? Would this be like the retreat that you're talking about?
The retreat, there's this, he's like half comedian, half marriage counselor. I think you and I have watched this video. The guy, he talks about the nothing box.
Yes,
he
it's
talks
so
about,
real.
It's
It is so real.
Yeah,
I don't understand it, but it's real.
Brief synopsis. If you guys YouTube it, it's hilarious. Like a zillion views because it's so true. And it's made forever ago. But guy talks about, hey, look, woman's brain, like everything's connected, right?
Everything.
Like, if you're not going to do this, then it means you don't feel like this. What am I going to tell your mother when we see her on Christmas? She asks how things are going.
Oh, we're 10 years ahead.
I mean, instantly in a fight. Whereas a guy, we have this shelf of just boxes. And we're just like, well, if we take this problem, put it in a box, put it on the shelf, it stops growing. So what do you care? And that has helped me. Like, this is how guys can go to work when it's 100 degrees out or negative 20.
Yeah.
You know, that's why guys can work the extra hours knowing that it's for their family. It's just that ability to compartmentalize problems and say, look, I'm going to think about this later because I need to do something else that solves it now, you know?
Right.
And so guys can, obviously, he jokes about the nothing box, how he's like, hey, guys have this box that's nothing in it, and it's our favorite box because nothing can bother us because that's why it's so many relationships. Hey, what do you do tonight? Nothing? Okay, so you want to hang out? And the guy's like, no.
Oh my gosh, this was so big in our relationship. Yes. This was like, oh man, I'm so glad that I went
Nothing
through.
is something.
Yes,
Nothing is something.
Yes, and I had to learn that. And like, that's that rejection that women have to work through of like, hey guys, if your man is not doing anything and he does not want to hang out with you, we have to recognize that is not rejection and that is truly he just wants to do nothing. And one thing that I learned about Dan, and we'll get back to this, this is like just such a huge topic. One thing that I learned about Dan, he wants to be intentional. I would say even to a fault of like,
absolutely,
you want to bring everything to the table, and if you can't, then you're not even going to try to offer 80%. It's
got to be a home run.
Yes,
a home run, or I'm not going to bat.
Yep. And I would say that this was a blessing in a relationship, but also at times have brought hurt. And you and I have talked about that. Of, hey, I just need to be present around you. Like it's not been a good day or a good week. Like I just need your presence. And you're like, I can't give you all of me, so I'm not going to give you any of me.
I can't host you right now. Basically, is how I viewed it.
Right. And I love that characteristic about you. You are like that in every single one of your relationships. But we've talked about, hey, like sometimes a person just needs your presence.
To a
like,
fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I think one thing that I learned through that with you of like, oh, he's not rejecting me. He just simply wants to give me all of him. And that was such a good realization to have as a woman, because it's like I said, it's that constant fear of rejection of, oh, he doesn't want to hang out with me. Does he even ever enjoy hanging out with me? Or like you're like the woman goes back to like the past like 5 dates, like everything's interconnected. He doesn't want to hang out with me tonight. So like, oh my gosh, I probably said something wrong the moment I met him. Like that's probably why. Like we overemphasize everything. We create our own mountains. And so going back to the nothing box, like it is so real. And I think such a huge revelation that I've had to have in marriage of, oh, men and women operate so differently. And it is so important to know whether you're in business, whether you are in marriage, dating, friendships, like recognizing that men and women think differently, have different needs, respond differently has been so helpful in our marriage.
Yeah.
So huge. Yes. So we have, if you're getting defensive, probably an insecurity that you are not wanting to be exposed. If you're creating your own mountains, there's probably a fear of abandonment that you are struggling with. And then the third one is you pity yourself. And I'm not going to lie, like I have been guilty of this as much as I don't want to admit it, of like talking down about myself in an argument or in a conflict because I am fearing unacceptance. So I need your words of affirmation to say, oh, you're not like that. Oh, that's not you. Don't think like that. You're like, that's why we do that in conflict is we will pity ourselves. We will talk down to ourselves in front of that person because we're craving their affirmation.
Guys do the same thing.
Yes. That's what I was going to ask you. Like,
I would say the issue is the exact same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just like downgrading yourself in an argument in hopes of the other person responding. And I even found myself, because I do it, it's really hard for me if I'm in a conflict with someone else to affirm the other person in the argument if I notice that they're doing that, because although that's what they need, I'm only feeling an insecurity. So in marriage, like if let's say, you find me doing that, do you feel like it is healthy to affirm me in that moment? Or is that something where we just need to, take a minute? Like what have you found from a man's perspective?
Yeah. I mean, affirming in the moment, and sometimes affirmation can be like, look, that's a lie from the pit of hell. You know, that's to me, I don't think that's fueling an insecurity. I think you should, you definitely shouldn't just ignore it. Like if your partner puts themselves down in front of you, like, don't just be like, oh yeah,
you're
crazy.
right.
Talk about that later. Like, no, address it in the moment, don't nothing box it. But I'd say it's absolutely healthy to reaffirm the moment. Especially if you're married, like time's on your side. Like we can stick around long enough to have the conversation of, hey, look, you said this earlier. I just want you to know. That's a lie, or that's this, or hey, like I think it's the context that you put your affirmation in. I know it sounds like I'm being vaguey about it, but
no, I think that's so good. But
it's not unhealthy to affirm the person in the moment, I would say.
And I think to your point, like if you're going to affirm the person in the moment, I would say that it is a healthy expectation for that person to do a deeper dive on that insecurity of like, yes, I'm going to affirm you and I'm going to remind you that that's not true. But what I need from you is for you to work through that insecurity, because that it can affect relationships, and not necessarily putting a timeline expectation on that, but also like the Bible says that, and I have this scripture pulled up so I say it right, wounds from a sincere friend are better than kisses from an enemy. And I think in marriage, it's so important to call that other person out. Like I think we have this idea that love is accepting and that love is almost like enabling the other person. So I think we can affirm them, but also not enable them to continue to think like that of, hey, you said this, like, where is that coming from? I think it's so healthy to pull that out of a person and call them out of, hey, you said this, that's not true. Where is that coming from? Because then it's just going to keep coming up in arguments time after time again. So you would say that men do the same thing of that fearing unacceptance.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one that we have is that we typically blame others, or we blame things for happening. And this is typically a sign of unforgiveness of self that's happening. And I would say that this is going to be the hardest one for us to touch on, because I would say that we keep blame out of our conversations a lot, or if not all the time.
Well, because the other stuff mitigates that, right?
Yeah, right.
Like if you wanted to create a tier chart here, like just being aware of your insecurities should be your highest priority in any argument, because that would just make other things easier, right? Like it's easy to not blame other people when you're like, oh man, I actually am really bad about this is what's happening right now. So it's like, yes, but by effect, not because it's just a superpower of ours. Is the reason why I'd say
That's a good
blame
point.
thing.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. It's almost like these are in order. Like, hey, get defensive. Do you create your mountains, pity yourself? And like that last one of, hey, if you haven't worked through the 3 of these, then you're probably at this 4th one. And
you're in denial, right?
Yeah,
so you're going to blame others.
Yeah, right. So just having that ownership is so important in relationships. I think is what we can go into of, hey, if you're blaming others, there's an unforgiveness of self or an unawareness of an insecurity that you have not addressed. But I think this is such a good time to say, like, ownership in a conflict is so important. And that is one of my favorite things about you. Even if I have fault in a conflict, you are the first one in the conversation to have ownership in our conflict, which is why I think our conflicts it's not that conflict is easy, but I think it creates a sense of relief because you and I go into conflict nearly every single time. And the only reason I'm saying nearly is because I don't like absolutes, because we're not perfect, but we're so adamant on going into the conflict, taking ownership of where our place is in the conflict before we have the conflict, hash it out,
Yeah. Well, this was something that I actually kind of battled with early on in just marriage, because I didn't realize how often I would create either some kind of environment or situation that made you react a certain way. Like for me, absolutely the toughest part about marriage is you are connected to someone for their entire life has processed things different than you.
Yeah.
And so there's so many times I've been like, well, square one was you not responding in the way that if I would respond, I would have been fine. And just kind of, I really battled with that in the beginning. And so I kind of realized, like, hey, wait a minute, if you know she's going to respond a certain way, yeah, okay, that may be wrong, that may be right, but like, don't put her in that situation where that's going to have an impression on her. It's going to cause her to react that way, right? Like, yeah. I think there's been times where, schedule's been overloaded, or I didn't explain something to you, so then you felt like you were doing something wrong, so you feel like you're wasting your time, and I had to kind of walk myself back. I'm like, no, I literally didn't give you enough time to set this thing up for success. And I know you get like this when that happens, so I just should have figured that out from the beginning. So it was a huge battle for me to be. I'm so glad you're just, so great husband now. But I actually
put you on a podcast all the time.
Yeah,
hype you up.
Well, I really sucked at the beginning because you struggled with stuff. I was like, why don't you just not react that way and you'd be fine? It's like, well, it's kind of irrational because there's definitely issues that I have where you're like, why don't you just not react that way? And I don't take those talks very well. Even if you're correct in saying that, not saying, well, you just let your spouse react however they want, but realize that just you might set something up in advance that causes them to start getting stressed or pissed or whatever.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And it's something that just conflict in general it takes time. It takes time to recognize our blind spots. It takes time to recognize our insecurities that maybe we've been acting out of without realizing it. It takes time to learn how to navigate another person. It takes time to navigate another gender. We talked about earlier, like males and females are wildly different in the way they think, respond, emotionally process, mentally process. I don't have a nothing box. I don't even know what that would feel like. Wish I did, but everything is intertwined and connected. So one thing I would love to ask you, because when you're on the podcast, the views just skyrocket.
Oh, stop! Get out of here.
So I do know that we will have some males listening. And I'll kind of respond for the girls listening, but for our male listeners of this podcast, what would you like to just give them from an aspect of like what we've learned in our conflict with each other, with coworkers, with friends, just from a male's heart and a male's perspective? What, I don't want to say advice, but what words could you give them in a way that directs them of how to navigate future conflict?
I think a lot of what we talked about in the last episode I was on, The Heart of the Man, of just figuring out there's so much that gets relieved, obviously being restored by God, but for me that wasn't my first step, even though that was a deeper step. My first step was just boundaries, right? Like boundaries. Who am I and who am I not? Well, let's say we have a cabin in the woods, right? A cabin in the woods just sitting
great.
up. It's gosh. Last episode we'll ever do, guys.
Like this example. Keep going.
Unless Elon Musk pays for our internet or something. You're freaking ridiculous.
That is a thing.
It is a thing. Anyways, distractions. So imagine we have this cabin in the woods, right? And there's no kind of fence or anything, but it's beautiful and it's fun. And you come in and you say, hey, look, there's someone walking around out in the woods with like a giant stick or an axe or whatever, right? Well, that's pretty freaky because we're very exposed and we're very vulnerable. We have this great place. I'm not disrespecting the cabin. I'm not saying I don't want to be there with you. Like, I'm not even saying I don't want to be. I just do want to be there. But it's scary that this guy's walking around at night with an axe, right? Even though a person in the woods with axe could be doing a lot of things. And that's what it's like to not have boundaries, right? The smallest thing is a threat. An animal in that situation would be a threat.
Yeah.
Right? Like a bear, if you don't have any kind of boundary, is scary. Like a coyote is scary, right? A wolf is scary. Imagine, okay, we upgrade a bit and I put these giant wooden stakes in the ground. I make these like 8-foot fences. Mm-hmm. And now there's some guy creeping around, clearly up to no good. Do we have to be as worried? Well, not really. Which is kind of funny, right? Guy walking around in the woods with an axe, super scary because we didn't have boundaries. But now guy creeping around the woods, well, we've got our fences. I mean, unless this guy is like the high jump Olympic world record holder, we're probably good, like we're probably fine. Yeah, we need to be a bit precautious. Okay, now imagine you upgrade yourself to like this giant castle with these giant stone walls. And there's someone, you come up to me, you say, Dan, there's someone out there who is really trying to hurt you, right? And by hurt, I mean conflict. Like he's got a sword and that sword is just the worst thing someone could say to you, right? I mean, they're going to disrespect you. They're going to insult your family, who you are. It's going to hurt. Like they just, that sword is the thing they know. They just have the perfect words to just absolutely set you off. And every guy knows what those words are or what situation that is. If you're in a giant castle with giant walls, stone walls, and a guy walks up to your stone wall and starts smacking it with a sword, you don't really do anything about it. Mm-hmm. You're just kind of done.
Such a good analogy.
And people are going to, whoa, aren't you going to do anything? It's like, well, it's actually more effort to deal with this person than it is to just leave him there. Like, he's not going to chop down our wall with a sword.
Wow.
Even though that
so
thing
good.
is the most, like, I mean, and every guy's had this moment where, like, something got said to him and just set him off. Like, imagine that. But when you know who you are and who you're not, it sets these insane boundaries that these conflicts come up, and it's just like, I know I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Because it's not me. Mm-hmm. And that's work, that's relationships, that's it literally, and it's been such a blessing just God helping me walk through that of setting boundaries. And it starts that way, right? First you have none, and then you have like a dingy little fence, and then you get a taller fence, and then you get the stone walls. And the stone wall is like, it's so calming. Like someone will like honk at you and flip you off the road, and you'll just laugh.
Yeah.
Because you're like, man, I remember they used to set me out. Like what? There's nothing in me that needs to deal with this right now because I've got the giant castle walls, right?
Wow.
I don't care if you come through with a stinking rocket launcher. You're still not going to take it down. It's such, I literally cannot express enough how important it is to just have those boundaries. Again, the last time I was on the episode, we talked about No More Mr. Nice Guy was a huge book for me. There's also this thing called the Assertiveness Workbook. I never finished it because it just honestly, by like page 20 or something like that, I'd already done everything. But it's a workbook you work through, which kind of helps you work through how you deal with conflict, right? It's all about conflict. It's for guys and girls both. And it goes through, just defining stuff helped me out a lot. So there's passive, there's assertive, there's aggressive, there's passive-aggressive, and there's alternator, right? Passive and aggressive, we get what those mean. Assertiveness is just what we just talked about. What am I and what I'm not? We're not having an opinion on that. We're not saying if that's good or bad. We're just saying, here's what I am, here's what I'm not. Alternator is when people snap. They're passive, and then they blow up one day, and they're punching holes in walls, and they're screaming at people. A lot of people call it passive-aggressive. It's not actually passive-aggressive. It's called an alternator, right? You're swinging back and forth. Passive-aggressive is then you intentionally do stuff to people, but you act like you had no idea, right? It's like we're a one-car unit right now. Imagine every time I was mad at you, so every time it was your turn to need the car, it just happened to not have any gas in it, and you had to go fill it up every time.
I need to fill up gas.
And I just
before you go to
you've been driving it. But you know what I mean? Like, and it's just and I'm just mad at you. So I'm like, I'll just make sure like every time she gets in the car, there's gonna be something in it that sucks. There's gonna be candy wrappers everywhere. It's gonna be not have gas. Like that's something passive aggressive, right? Doing something is gonna just bug the other person or it's gonna cause conflict with the other person. But you do it in a way where you can act like you had no idea. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. It wasn't really, man. I meant to fill it up earlier. I'm sorry. Like that's passive. So just knowing those 4 terms and the workbook, again, it helps you kind of navigate through stuff. And there's journal entries and stuff like that you can work through. This is like forever ago I did this, so it's pretty cheap back then. I don't know how much it is now, but Assertiveness Workbook, fantastic resource.
We can tag it in the show notes.
Build your castle walls. It is such a blessing because when someone attacks with what would have absolutely murdered you 3 years ago, it just does nothing to you now. And it's And I'm sure God's a big part of that too. I don't want to take God out of the equation, but I think guys need more deliberate steps than like, well, just pray for peace, man. Like, I know.
Yes, yep, absolutely. And you know what? That is why there are more listeners when you're on the show. I love that analogy.
Yell into the microphone all the time.
No, I love that analogy. That's so good because boundaries can be so intimidating, or they can sound like really hurtful, especially, when boundaries have to come up in family. Like that can sound really hurtful to put up boundaries with the most important people or the people you love the most, but that's why boundaries are so important.
Yeah.
And just your visual of there are different levels of boundaries. There's, your little measly picket fence, and then you grow it taller, and then you have the stone versus, nothing. And I can feel when you were saying, hey, everything's a threat, whether it's a little bunny rabbit hopping through the woods that shuffle the leaves, you're like, what was that?
Yeah, you got no defense.
Versus the man with the axe. Like that, I feel that so much, and I feel like our listeners can too, of everything is a threat when you don't have boundaries. It's like, what am I going to have to deal with next? But when you have those strong boundaries and you know who you are, who you're not, what matters and what doesn't, nothing can touch you because you are sound and firm in who you are and how Christ made you and how you were designed. And I think we can be very firm in our insecurities of knowing that it's an insecurity. Hey, we're working through it. I'm not healed by this, but I recognize it. I know it's there. So maybe this person isn't, firmly in my life right now, or maybe I need to unfollow a couple of things. I think we can be very strong through our insecurities, but also recognize that they are still in need of being healed and worked through.
Yeah.
So I love that visual. And I want the listeners to really take that with them of like, where are you at? Ask yourself, men and women, where are you at with your boundaries in your life? Do you have none and everything's a threat? Do you have your small little picket fence up of like, hey, I'm learning boundaries, and now the little bunny rabbit is no longer a threat, but the man with the axe probably could still climb over over my fence. But then you have the taller fence, and then you have the stone walls like, hey, nothing can shake me because I'm sound in who I am. And, if you are in the place where you feel like maybe your boundaries at a little picket fence, like don't compare yourself to the person with the stone walls because it took time to get there.
Yeah.
I know with, I was not a part of your manhood journey, but I know we've reflected on it a lot. We've had deep conversations about it. And it's just so cool to see, hey, this did take time, whether that was listening to podcast while you were working or reading a book. I know you read No More Mr. Nice Guy like more than once, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like each time grabbing something new from that and adding it to your life. So thank you for reiterating that. And I feel like, yes, that's from a very man perspective, but ladies, know that boundary analogy does apply to you too. From a woman's perspective, a lot of our conflict does stem from a fear of rejection, whether that's you're upset because your significant other isn't texting you, or maybe you're upset because someone's not communicating with you fully. A lot of women do struggle with that fear of rejection because, the natural desire on our heart is to be pursued. So when we are pursued, but then, something happens and we're rejected, whether that's from a parent, whether that's from a boss, whether that is from our significant other, it's still rejection.
Yeah.
And we still have to work through it. So a lot of the ways that we respond in conflict is that fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, and we will respond through that or respond through, I knew I wasn't enough. It's almost like we let our conflicts validate our lie in our head of I'm not enough or I'm not doing enough. But that is, again, like you said, lie from the pit of hell that we need to address. And ladies, if you are finding yourself in conflict, and doing these things, and again, to reiterate, get defensive, creating your own mountains, you're pitting yourself or you're blaming others or other aspects around you, there are some insecurities that do need to be addressed. Now, am I saying that you'll get to this perfect point and you won't do any of these? No, because we're broken humans and we will always be humans that are carrying hurt. And it's just a matter of working through that hurt constantly within our lives and restoring back to the Father, leaning on the Father and being filled with what his word says about us rather than the words that have been said to us. So just to give that woman's perspective, I don't have, this grandiose analogy, sorry ladies, that Dan had, but I can say that a lot of my reflection has come through journaling and prayer, and honestly, mentors have pulled a lot out of me. Friendships have pulled a lot out of me of just kind of calling me out in certain things, of seeing what I've been through, or seeing what, from a childhood perspective, from an adult perspective. So having those friendships around you to be able to pull that out of you, and not allowing like bitterness or resentment when people are trying to pull something out of you. Because I think women do verbally process. So like you were saying earlier, like you worked through a workbook, and I think that is a testament to men. They have to be on their own time with processing. But women, on the other hand, we're chatty Cathy's, and we love to verbally process. I can't speak to every single woman, but that relationship is really important to a woman. So having that relationship to verbally process things through, I think having those secure friendships, those trusting friendships, are really important when it comes to healing insecurities and talking through them. So just some scripture that I wanted to give as we wrap things up. I don't know if you knew this, y'all, but the book of Proverbs is real good when you are working through conflict. It gives a world of wisdom. If there's something that you are working through, I know many times that I've had conflict, I will reflect, pray, but I'll also just kind of see what the Bible says about how to handle this. It is really cool. Like we look at the Bible as oftentimes it's like hard to understand, or a rule book, or the book that shows us how we're just faulty in all things. But it really is a book that we should be going to when we're looking for wisdom, when we're looking for insight. And some of the scripture that I had pulled from Proverbs, and it says, all the ways of a man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the hearts. And now that is maybe not the version in your Bible, so it may say something a little bit different. But basically what the scripture mean is we operate off our own understanding. We operate off our own perspective. And I think, Dan, you and I have found that a lot of times in our conflict of where we've had to stop the conflict and just say, you know what, this is getting nowhere. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah.
And just knowing that we operate completely off of our own perspective, off of the seat that we sat in to watch everything unfold in the conflict that we're in. It's so important to recognize in all conflict that every person is defending their own perspective. And sometimes stopping in the middle of a conflict, if you feel like it's going nowhere, the wisest thing to do is stop, sit, listen, instead of speaking, and listen to the other person's perspective so that you can come to an understanding rather than trying to be right in the situation.
Yeah, and have the boundaries set ahead of time that, hey, like I need the same from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, with the boundaries.
Because one person is going to be naturally better at it than the other person. Like it's just how it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that, I have definitely had that happen within our conflicts of the other person's just ready to be right, prove a point, but it's not the healthy way to go. And the other person, I feel like God does that in our relationship of like, one of us will be having a really bad day, one of us will be having a really good day. So we like keep each other balanced out. So like one of our, yes, absolutely. We found that so many times. But take this scripture into, marriage, dating, co-working space. Do know that everyone truly is operating out of their own understanding. And we often think that our understanding is right, even if it's not. And then the second verse is Proverbs 15:4 that says, a soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So basically, we have to be so careful of what our tongue says in conflict, to where if we're bringing conflict to a table, we can so easily, to prove a point, say something that is really, really hurtful to that other person, but that is only bringing death to the relationship, death to the other person's spirit. So knowing that our words have so much power, and I always think of like the toothpaste analogy of like once it's squirted out, you can't stuff it back in. So knowing that even in the midst of conflict, when you're heated, when you're frustrated, your words do have the power of life and death over them. And you absolutely can wound someone in the essence of you trying to just be right or prove a point. So Proverbs 15:4 is definitely one that we stand on of just, hey, if things start to get escalated, we just need to stop because we are going to say something that is meant to prove a point, but it's just going to hurt the other person's heart, and which can create like that bitterness and resentment in our hearts.
Yeah, the fight will be long done, but we'll still be mad about that one comment made, and it's just not worth it.
Yeah, and then it'll be brought up later, or did you really mean that? Or it can create an insecurity in a marriage of, oh, he said this, like, I wonder if he's still thinking that. I wonder, where did that actually come from? He's been thinking this for a while. So just being very communicative in how you feel or how you felt when another person did these actions, but then just making sure that the tongue is always staying edifying. And the last point that I have on here is that we often will just let our past speak for us. And I think that just goes back to Proverbs 16:2 of we operate of our own understanding, and our own understanding basically comes from how we saw the conflict, but then also our past and our upbringing. And we have to recognize that, hey, it's not just the seat they sat in when the conflict arises, it's the seat that they've sat in their entire life, of seeing how parents dealt with conflict, seeing how people communicate with each other, because that is all carried into marriage, whether we realize it or not. It's how we saw things being handled is how we think should be handled in marriage. And a lot of times that can really rub up against each other, whether that's, again, in any relationship, and having that perspective that the other person has a wildly different past than you do of, hey, they're handling this conflict in a way that I absolutely would not handle this conflict. But it truly is because we see the way that we handle conflict or the way that we have been taught to handle conflict, but we have no idea how that person's past looks. And just having that in the back of our mind is so important, that we are all coming from different upbringings, and that can absolutely cause an uproar in conflict. But once we recognize it, it can dial things down. Mm-hmm. Awesome, guys. Well, this concludes our episode. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show again. I just had to get my views up, so I thought I'd have you. I'd have you on again. It has nothing to do with your wisdom or your insight. Just wanted to get my views up again. So appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, no problem. Filling another role on your show.
Absolutely. Well, awesome, guys. And just to kind of kick it off here, our Unshackled program, if you do not know, has been released. These are revelations that I personally have had in my own walk with the Lord of healing those insecurities. There's a lot of insight in here of very similar things that we covered on today's episode. Just healing that is so important, not only for ourselves and our own freedom, but in the outcome and the health of our relationships, of our outcome, of our purpose, of our passions. If we are acting out of insecurities or wounds from our past, it will lead us towards a path of destruction in our life, towards unhealthy relationships. And there's just such a more healthier way of life, and the Lord wants to reveal that to each of us. So that is why Unshackled was written. If you are one that you're ready to feel that restoration, ready to feel that mental freedom, you are struggling with the ruminating thoughts in your head, you're struggling with insecurities, you feel like your insecurities are driving your life, your emotions are driving your life, this would be a wonderful program for you. Or if you're just looking to learn how to read and apply and understand the Bible, this program is absolutely for you. So go ahead and check that out. It is tagged in the show notes. Wanted to put that in there for a great next step. Join our free community that we have. We are studying in Esther right now. I give free devotionals every single day. So if you're one who is just looking to further the relationship with the Lord, but you don't really know where to go in the Bible or how it applies to your life, this would be a great next step. So thank you guys for listening. Really appreciate you all. And Dan, I can't wait to see how many listeners just come to the podcast for this episode.
You're ridiculous.
All right. I think we are both hungry, so we're going to go eat some lunch.
We're over it.
That's right. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for joining us at the table today, sister. If you benefited from today's podcast, the greatest way to give back is by simply sharing with others. The Bible says to be fruitful and multiply, and we believe that we can multiply God's word by speaking it. To help us multiply the impact of this podcast, we please ask you to subscribe, share, post, or rate this podcast below to help awaken our world to His Word. If you share to your stories, tag Iron 31 Sisterhood and post your most impactful takeaway from today. We want to connect with you. Lastly, don't forget to head on over to iron31.com to see what all we offer, such as our newest course, Unshackled, our free Nehemiah devotional, our weekly group coaching, our free newsletter, and our free community for exclusive content. Thank you for listening, sister, and have the best day ever.